AITA for telling my parents they need to take care of their kid. It is not my duty. When I was born, my parents were 18 and 19, basically kids themselves. I don't think they ever really planned on being parents that young, and they definitely made it obvious that they weren't thrilled about it. Growing up, I always felt like they resented having me, like I was a burden or a constant reminder of something that went wrong. They didn't do any of the typical things you'd expect parents to do. There was no helping with homework, no bedtime stories, no showing up for school events. They didn't even bother with the basic stuff like attending parent-teacher conferences. It was always just me, on my own, figuring things out because they didn't seem to care enough to be there. When it came to things like permission slips or report cards that needed to be signed, I learned pretty quickly that if I wanted them to be signed on time, I'd have to shove them right under their noses. It wasn't that they were busy, at least, not in the way you'd think. They just didn't care to make the time. I remember more than once my teachers asking if everything was okay at home because I'd be the only one with unsigned forms, and I didn't really know what to say. I mean, what was I supposed to tell them? That my parents just didn't give a crap, because that was the truth. I never had big birthday celebrations or exciting Christmas mornings. My birthdays were usually just another day. Sometimes they'd give me a card with money in it, but there was no party, no cake, nothing that made me feel like they were excited to celebrate my life. And it hurt, especially as a kid. I would see my friends get these big celebrations, and their parents would throw these parties and be so involved, and I never got that. What made it worse was that my parents always celebrated their wedding anniversary. They'd go out to dinner, get each other gifts, and post about how much they love each other on social media. It was like they could only be excited about things that were just about them, and I was just there. I don't have any extended family to rely on. My parents were basically disowned when they had me, probably because they were so young and everyone thought they were ruining their lives. So, there was nobody around to fill in the gaps my parents left. I'd spend as much time as I could at friends' houses because at least there, I felt wanted. Their parents would ask me how I was, and they'd make me feel like I was a part of things. Some of them even started to feel like second families. But no matter how much time I spent with them, I'd always have to come back home eventually, back to a place where it felt like I didn't matter. Then, 2 years ago, my parents sat me down and told me they were expecting a baby. I don't think I could even process it at first. I was shocked, but more than that, I was hurt. I mean, they were never excited about me, and now here they were, practically glowing with joy at the thought of having a baby. It was like a slap in the face. They started making all these plans, talking about how they couldn't wait to be parents. They talked about all the things they were going to do with the baby, how they were going to raise her, and how this was the start of their real family. It was one of my mom's friends who finally pointed out, "Well, you already have a kid." I thought maybe that would snap them out of it a little, remind them that I existed. But instead, they brushed it off, saying that I was their practice run and that this was going to be different. I can't even begin to explain how much that hurt. I was just a practice run. A test they could redo now that they were older and ready. It felt like I was being erased, like everything I'd ever needed from them as a kid was dismissed because I was just their mistake that they were now correcting. When my little sister was born, everything changed. They were obsessed with her. I mean, absolutely obsessed. They were attentive, they were loving, and they were everything they never were with me. It was like they'd suddenly figured out how to be parents, but only for her. I didn't know how to feel. I was glad she was getting the love and attention she deserved, but at the same time, I was angry because I never got that, and it was like they didn't care that I could see the difference. One day, I got sick at school. I felt awful, and the nurse said I needed to go home. They tried calling my parents over and over, but nobody picked up. Finally, I had to wait until the end of the school day and just go home on the bus. When I got there, the house was empty. My parents didn't show up until late that evening, and when I asked why they didn't answer the phone, they said they had taken my sister out for a family day and turned off their phones so they could focus on the baby. I couldn't believe it. I was sick, and they didn't even know because they decided to pretend they didn't have responsibilities for a few hours. And it's not like that was a one-time thing. After my sister was born, I was pretty much invisible. My mom quit her job so she could be a stay-at-home mom, and my dad started leaving work early on Fridays so he could spend more time with them. They were this perfect little family now, and I was just a leftover they had to deal with until I turned 18. They even started trying for another baby almost as soon as my sister was born, but it hasn't been working, and now they're doing fertility treatments to see if they can figure out what's wrong. Recently, they sat me down and told me they need my help. Apparently, these fertility treatments take a few hours every week, and they need me to watch my sister while they go. They had this whole list written out for me, like I was a babysitter they had hired. They told me what my sister likes, what her schedule is, what I need to do to take care of her. They just assumed I would be okay with it, but I'm not. I told them no. I told them I'm not going to watch her because she's not my kid. They chose to have her. They need to take care of her. My dad tried to make me feel guilty, saying it's just a few hours a week and that it's not a big deal. He even said I should look at it as paying back all they did for me. That's when I lost it. I told him they didn't give a crap about me for 15 years, so why would I help them now? They were furious, saying I was being ungrateful and selfish, but I don't think I'm wrong. They never acted like parents to me. They never made me feel loved or wanted. And now they want to play happy family and expect me to just go along with it. No, I'm not going to pretend everything is fine when it's not. The next morning, I woke up to the sound of my alarm, groggy and still fuming from the argument with my parents the night before. I honestly expected some kind of cold shoulder from them, maybe more snide comments about how ungrateful I was, but what I didn't expect was the note. It was propped up on the kitchen counter, just a simple piece of paper with my dad's handwriting scrawled across it. I didn't even have my eyes fully open, but when I read the words, my stomach dropped. The note said, "Had to leave early. We'll be back late tonight. You need to look after your sister. Follow the schedule we gave you. See you later." That was it. No please, no thank you, no acknowledgement that I'd already said no. Just a statement, like this was all a done deal. My heart started pounding. It was like everything I'd said last night, everything I'd tried to get across, didn't matter at all. They'd just decided I was going to do it whether I liked it or not. I rushed through the house, half hoping I'd find my mom or dad still there, maybe putting on shoes or grabbing their keys. But it was silent, and my sister was still asleep in her crib. I felt a wave of panic, but I didn't have time to think because I needed to figure out what to do next. I checked the clock and realized it was already past 9 a.m. They'd been gone for at least an hour. They had just left me alone with her, like it was no big deal, as if I hadn't made it abundantly clear that I didn't want this responsibility. I picked up my phone and called my dad, hoping maybe he'd pick up, and I could tell him how completely out of line this was. The phone rang and rang before going to voicemail. I tried again, same result. My hands were shaking as I called my mom next. After a couple of rings, she actually answered, and for a second, I thought maybe she'd apologize or at least explain why they thought this was okay. But all she said was, "We're really busy right now. We'll talk when we get home tonight." I tried to respond, tried to tell her that this wasn't fair, that they couldn't just dump her on me after I said no, but she cut me off, saying she had to go, and then she hung up. I was left standing there with the phone still in my hand, staring at the screen like I'd been slapped. I couldn't believe what just happened. They had left me, a 15-year-old, to take care of a baby for an entire day because it was convenient for them, because they didn't want to deal with finding another solution. They hadn't even considered that maybe I didn't want to spend my Saturday stuck at home babysitting when I had other plans. I felt trapped. What was I supposed to do now? It's not like I could just leave her. She was my sister, and she was innocent in all this, but that didn't make it okay. It didn't make it right that my parents were putting me in this position without caring about how I felt. I went to check on her, and she was still asleep, which at least gave me a minute to sit down and try to think. I had no idea what their day looked like or when they'd be back. I didn't even know where they were going. They hadn't bothered to tell me, probably because they didn't see me as someone who needed to know. I was just the built-in babysitter who had to do what she was told. I pulled out the list they'd given me a few days ago, the one with all the instructions on how to take care of her. I hadn't even wanted to look at it before because I wasn't planning on doing any of it, but now I didn't have a choice. It was all there in black and white: when to feed her, when to change her diaper, when she'd probably take her naps, what games to play with her to keep her entertained. It was so detailed, like they'd thought of everything except how wrong it was to expect me to just take this on without any say in the matter. I spent most of the day taking care of her, following the instructions on that list, and feeling more and more bitter with every passing hour. Every time I had to change her diaper, every time I had to stop what I was doing to feed her or make sure she was okay, it just reminded me of how much my parents didn't care about my feelings. They could have asked someone else. They could have found a sitter. Hell, they could have brought her with them if it was that important. But they didn't, because they knew it was easier to just push me around. I'd be lying if I said I wasn't angry at my sister, too, even though I knew it wasn't her fault. She was just a baby, but taking care of her felt like this huge, impossible task they dumped on me, and I resented it. I resented that they were forcing me to take on their responsibilities when they should have been the ones doing this, not me. Throughout the day, I tried calling my parents a couple more times, hoping one of them would at least explain what was going on. Maybe I thought if I kept calling, they'd realize how wrong this was. But they didn't answer, and every time they sent me to voicemail, I got more and more frustrated. I had friends who were supposed to come over that afternoon, and I had to cancel because there was no way I could have people over while I was stuck looking after my sister. I texted them to explain, and even though they were understanding, I still felt embarrassed. It was humiliating that I had to cancel because my parents were making me play mom for the day. As the afternoon dragged on, I felt this mix of exhaustion and helplessness. I was tired of running around, trying to make sure she was okay, but I was also tired of feeling like my life wasn't my own. Like everything I did had to revolve around their plans, their needs, without any regard for what I wanted. It was like I was invisible until they needed something from me, and then suddenly, I was supposed to step up and be responsible because they said so. By the time evening rolled around, I was mentally and physically drained. I fed my sister dinner, put her down for another nap, and then just sat there in the quiet, waiting for my parents to come home. When they finally did, it was late. I could hear them laughing as they walked through the door, like they'd just had the best time ever. They didn't even acknowledge me at first, just went to check on my sister, and then my mom casually asked how everything went. I was so angry, I didn't even know what to say. All day, I'd been trying to figure out how to tell them this wasn't okay, how they couldn't just force this on me, but in that moment, all the words got stuck. They acted like nothing was wrong, like I hadn't spent the entire day doing something I never agreed to, and that made it worse. I finally managed to say what I had been thinking all day. I told them I absolutely did not like the way they acted, that it wasn't fair to just dump my sister on me without any warning, especially after I'd made it clear that I wasn't okay with it. I thought they would at least try to understand, maybe explain why they felt they had to do it. But instead, they just looked at me like I was being unreasonable, like I was making a big deal out of nothing. They told me that it didn't matter whether I liked it or not. They said no one was asking me for permission, that this was my duty as the older sister. It felt like they were dismissing everything I said, like my opinion didn't count at all. I could feel my heart sinking, the weight of their words pressing down on me. They didn't see me as their daughter with her own life and her own plans. They saw me as someone who was there to make their lives easier, to take on responsibilities that weren't mine to begin with. I wanted to scream, to make them understand how unfair this was, but I forced myself to stay calm. I reminded them that she was their child, not mine, and that they should be the ones looking after her. I wasn't the one who decided to have another baby. They made that choice, and they should be the ones dealing with the responsibilities that came with it. But they just shook their heads, like I didn't get it, like I was the one being selfish. They told me that as her sister, I had a role to play, and that included helping out whenever they needed it. Hearing them say that made me feel so small, so insignificant. It was like everything I had been trying to tell them, all the reasons I had for not wanting to be a part of this, didn't matter. They had already decided how things were going to be, and my job was to fall in line. I couldn't believe that they actually thought this was okay, that they really believed I owed it to them to take care of my sister because we happened to share the same parents. It was like they were twisting everything around, making me feel guilty for not wanting to take on a responsibility that wasn't mine in the first place. And then they said something that left me completely speechless. They said I should be grateful for the chance to look after my sister because it would give me experience, that I'd learn how to take care of children and that this was something I'd need to know someday. I couldn't even process it at first. Grateful, for what? For being forced into a role I never asked for. For losing my weekends, my free time, because they decided to have another child and didn't want to deal with the inconvenience of finding a babysitter. It felt like they were trying to dress up this huge imposition as some kind of opportunity, like they were doing me a favor by making me look after her. The more they talked, the more I realized that this wasn't going to change. They didn't see anything wrong with what they were doing, and they weren't going to stop. They had already decided that this was how things were going to be, and I was expected to fall in line, to do what they said without question. They told me that I should continue looking after my sister, that it wasn't a big deal, just a few hours here and there, and that I needed to stop making such a fuss about it. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I felt trapped, like my life was being taken over by this responsibility I never wanted, and there was nothing I could do about it. They were turning me into a babysitter, and they didn't even see why that was wrong. They didn't see why it wasn't okay to force me into this role just because it was convenient for them. I was still their child, and I was still trying to navigate my own life, but none of that seemed to matter to them. All they cared about was that they had someone who could step in and take over whenever they wanted, and they didn't even think twice about how I felt about it. After that argument with my parents, things didn't get better. If anything, they got worse. It was like once they realized I wasn't going to willingly go along with their plan, they decided they'd just force it anyway. Almost every week, they'd come up with some reason for me to watch my sister. At first, it was just when they had their fertility appointments, but then it became more frequent. Suddenly, there were errands that they both needed to run, or mom needed a break because she was so overwhelmed, or dad wanted to take mom out for a rare night off. And every time, it was just assumed that I'd be there, ready to take over. I tried to push back a few times, but it never seemed to make a difference. They'd either ignore what I was saying or find some way to guilt-trip me into it, telling me I was being ungrateful, or that I didn't understand how hard it was for them. It got to the point where I'd be dreading coming home from school, because I knew there was a good chance I'd walk through the door and be handed my sister, along with a list of things I needed to do while they went off somewhere else. I felt like I was losing pieces of myself bit by bit, like my time and my freedom didn't belong to me anymore. My weekends were no longer my own. If I tried to make plans, I had to be vague about them because I never knew if my parents would suddenly decide they needed me to babysit. And if I did try to get out of it, they'd act like I was being selfish, like I didn't care about my sister. But it wasn't about her. I didn't resent her. She was just a baby, and none of this was her fault. It was about the fact that they were treating me like a built-in nanny, someone who existed solely to make their lives easier. I was tired. Not just physically, though that was part of it, but emotionally drained. I couldn't concentrate at school, and my grades started slipping. I was snapping at my friends for no reason, and I felt like I was constantly on edge, just waiting for the next time I'd be roped into babysitting. The worst part was, it wasn't even like I was helping out in emergencies. It was just so they could have time for themselves, like they deserved a break but didn't think I did. One Friday, I had a plan to go to a friend's house after school. It was the only thing keeping me going all week. We were going to hang out, watch some movies, and just relax, something I hadn't been able to do in what felt like forever. I knew my parents were expecting me to watch my sister that night, but I was done. I needed a break, and I needed to feel like I had some control over my own life, even if it was just for a few hours. So, I didn't go straight home after school. Instead, I went to my friend's place like we had planned. Around dinner time, I called my parents and told them I was going to stay over at my friend's house for the night. I tried to sound casual, like it wasn't a big deal, but inside I was bracing myself for their reaction. I just wanted one night to breathe, to not have to worry about bottles and diapers and bedtime routines. But of course, they were furious. They told me I couldn't stay, that I needed to come home because they had plans and I was supposed to be watching my sister. It didn't matter to them that I'd been helping out nonstop, that I'd been giving up my weekends and afternoons. All they saw was that I wasn't there when they wanted me to be, and that was unacceptable to them. I tried to explain that I was tired, that I needed a break, but they wouldn't hear it. They acted like I was being completely unreasonable, like it was selfish of me to want one night off. They kept saying that it was my responsibility, and I had to come home. But I was so tired of hearing that, of being told over and over again that my life didn't matter as much as theirs, that my plans didn't count because they had decided I had to do something else. So, for once, I said no. I told them I was staying at my friend's house, and I hung up. For a few minutes, I felt a little thrill of defiance, like I'd finally stood up for myself. But it didn't last long. I should have known better than to think it would be that easy. About an hour later, there was a knock on the door, and when my friend's mom answered, there were my parents, standing there with expressions that made my stomach drop. I could see my dad's jaw was clenched, and my mom looked like she was barely holding back from yelling right there on the doorstep. They didn't say much, they just told me to get my things and come with them. When we got home, they didn't even let me go to my room. They made me sit in the living room, and then they started in on me. They said I was being irresponsible, that I was letting them down, that I was acting like a child. They made it sound like everything was my fault, like I was the one causing problems for the family because I didn't want to help. They kept talking about how they had sacrificed so much for me, how they'd worked so hard to give me everything I needed, and now I was acting like I couldn't do one simple thing for them. It was like they were trying to make me feel guilty, to make me see myself as the problem instead of them. So, I don't know. Am I the asshole for refusing to help them? Maybe I could have been nicer about it, but I'm just so tired of pretending like I don't see how they've treated me all these years. I don't owe them anything, and I'm not going to let them guilt me into doing something I don't want to do.